Welcome to the Strength Empire podcast, where we will cover all things strength sports, whether it's powerlifting, weightlifting, strongman, or the Highland Games. Before we begin, please make sure to follow us on social media at Strength Empire Podcast and at Strength Empire Gym. Also, if you'd like more information from us, you can find it at strengthempire.gym.com, as well as checking out the Strength Empire TV YouTube page for footage on training, throwing, nutrition, and meal prep and technique breakdown, etc. The last thing I'd like to ask you to do is to make sure you leave a 5-star rating and review on your podcast platform when you finish this episode. And if you could share it with your friends, that'd be awesome as well. So I hope you enjoy Season 1, Episode 5 with Preston Turner. Welcome back to another episode of the Strength Empire podcast. We're going to continue Season 1 tonight talking with Preston Turner. So Preston, thanks for joining me, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's really great to be a part of this.
Awesome, man. Well, I kind of gave Preston, and as I've done every guest so far, and I've kind of explained this with every episode, I sent them a message saying, hey, I'm doing this in a seasonal format, and my first season is crossover strength athletes. And really, I found you through social media, and I followed you for, it's probably been at least a year and a half now I've been following you. And I was like, I've got to, once I started this, talk to this guy and ask them, really, I'm sure you get this question a lot, is what made you switch from being a successful powerlifter to a weightlifter? So before we kind of dive into that, I want to kind of dig into, how did you get your start in strength sports or powerlifting specifically? Is that where you started? I guess I have to start with that.
Yeah. So I started with powerlifting. So I'm from Texas, and in Texas, powerlifting is a varsity sport at the high schools. Mm-hmm. And I've kind of always had a fascination with being strong and with getting strong and jacked up physiques and whatnot since I was really young. And I remember being like in middle school and seeing in the newspaper, write-ups about local high school powerlifters. And I knew I wanted to do that. And I was kind of, I guess, predisposed to be good at lifting weights from a very early age. From the first time I kind of started touching a barbell in middle school football. So I started doing powerlifting freshman year of high school, and, was on the varsity team at the high school and had the biggest bench of the high school. My freshman year, I'd done like a 315-pound bench or a 3-plate bench, mm-hmm. and competed all through there, was state champion. And, then from there, since my senior year of high school is when I got the start to the international scene on the USA Powerlifting and the International Powerlifting Federation.
Awesome, man. So talk to me about that transition. Did you, and I'm not 100% sure how that international, top national, international level works. Were you in the junior category, I'm assuming, and or where did your success lead at that point? Like, I know obviously I saw Instagram where you went, but kind of talk me through that career and how long were you doing that for?
Yeah, so altogether, I competed competitively in powerlifting for 10 years. Okay. Starting, and that's of course since I was a freshman in high school, but it really went to the next level. So there's just a high school federation in Texas. It's massive, thousands and thousands of young lifters. And anyway, I got approached at my senior year at the state meet. I had done a 550-pound bench press. This was equipped. Okay. And I had somebody come up to me I'd never seen. He said, "Do you realize you just did more than the world record?" And I was like, I had no clue. And he gave me a flyer and he said, "Come to Palm Springs, California, and let's get you on the USA national team." And that was my start to USA powerlifting. And since then, I competed in the Czech Republic in 2010, right out of high school. And that was a sub-junior category, to answer that part of your question. And so I won the world championship there and set a number of world records. And then from there went into the junior world champion, the junior division. Mm-hmm. And I competed there for the next 4 years and was able to, travel the world, go to a lot of different countries and win some world championships and some world titles for Team USA as a team, and set some records along the way.
Awesome, man. Now, was that always as a junior, or did you make it into a senior national level or international senior team level?
I did make it onto the senior national team level. But I had to back out of my first senior national team due to like a partial rotator cuff tear.
Oh, man.
Yeah, in the middle of training. And so I kind of had to back out of there, but was able to compete both equipped and raw as a senior at the senior level and set senior world records and such.
Okay. So what were your best competition lifts at, I guess I wouldn't say at the time you finished, but what were your best competition lifts in competition?
Yeah, so in equipped, I believe if we're talking pounds, it would be a 871 squat, a 733 bench, and a 722 deadlift.
Damn, hell of a together. What body weight were you at that point?
This was competing at 120 kilos or
awesome.
264 pounds.
Damn, there's some solid ass numbers. Of course, that would be world level numbers, man. That's awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
I honestly did not realize they were that high for you. In those. So I don't mean any disrespect by that. I just honestly had no idea.
Yeah, no worries. And then in terms of raw, then my best raw squat was 750, and my best raw bench in competition was, I believe, 740-ish. 540-ish.
I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, no. And then deadlift was 689.
Okay. So I actually really love, I didn't know you had an equipped lifting background. So short story, kind of to give you an example for myself and kind of where I'm going to lead some of these questions from. When I got into the sport of powerlifting, I did like one raw meet and then got thrown into full multiply powerlifting gear in like 2008, 9. The group I trained with, that's what they did. So it was one of those like, all right, I'm doing it. I'm getting in it, and borrowed gear and this, that, and the other. So I completely understand what you mean by those numbers. A lot of people don't know what geared powerlifting is, which is something I'm going to try to delve into a little bit more in the show. And obviously, it's wearing supportive equipment to perform the lifts. What I want to talk about, though, is training. What did your training? Did you start in gear at a younger age? Was high school just raw or equipped at all? I know you mentioned a 550 bench in there. And then how did your training evolve through powerlifting to, did you train in the gear all the time, or your raw lifts were very strong compared to your gear lifts relatively. You're a very strong raw squatter, at least I see there. And it's still a very strong raw bench. But, do you feel like the raw strength was something you should have pushed more, or the gear? I'm asking a million questions because I'm excited right now. But kind of delve into all that training with raw versus gear for me.
Yeah. So back when I started in powerlifting, this is 2005 in high school, and the high school lifting is equipped. It is single ply equipped. Yeah. So, and at that time, raw really wasn't a thing.
Yeah, you're right.
Equipped, and especially like in USA Power, well, everything was single ply, and then of course you had multiply. And so Texas high school powerlifting is single ply, and I started through there. And of course, I feel like it wasn't until maybe 2011 when raw lifting kind of started. And so, I competed equipped the whole time. And in fact, that was kind of like a big culture change in the sport, since, I was, I guess, there when raw started, and equipped that's where all the big lifters were. That's where anybody who was anybody was competing. And but in terms of my training, of course, you trained a lot raw, and you really push those because you can't just expect to put on the gear and lift big numbers. You got to be strong without it.
Absolutely.
And of course, that was always my mindset, was I wanted to get as strong as possible raw, so that I could lift more in the gear. And of course, when training for a meet, of course, you did spend time in the gear. But I took kind of at first kind of like a 3 to 4 day approach to training, 3 or 4 days a week.
Okay.
And it was usually like Mondays being a squat focus, Wednesdays being a bench focus, and Fridays being a deadlift focus. And then Saturday would be kind of a little bit more of like a bodybuilding style approach, just kind of some light stuff, more blood flow type things. But on those focus days is when you would train in the gear. And then the other lifts you would push raw.
Okay.
So that's kind of what I would do. And of course, things evolved over time, but I had some really great mentors and coaches along the way that kind of shaped different things. And I spent a lot of time doing like some more Chico type training, which was, high volume, even in the equipment, high frequency.
Wow. And okay. That's something I've never done and haven't heard a lot of, especially in the equipment.
Yeah. I had a coach, David Hammers, at the University of Texas where I lifted. And then of course, I met one of my best friends, Ian Bell, there, and got involved with him. And his dad, of course, is a powerlifting legend. And so I really started to learn from them as well, and kind of took and of course, as I learned more and has competed longer, I kind of took stuff from their program and stuff that I found that worked well for me and kind of blended the two.
Yeah, awesome, man. Now I still keep, and actually I got to talk with Travis Mash the other day, he was a geared lifter kind of at the start of his career as well. And it's always fun. Now I feel like it keeps run back into it more and more. But let's say, now we're digging right now, but what would you say kind of were your go-tos in terms of training? Like what style? For example, myself, I really relied on wearing my shirt a lot and touching a lot in my shirt. Some people are against that. They're like, it stretches it out. Or my squat, I was a big on working up and then doing a lot of reverse band work. So kind of what were your go-tos with training, with the different lifts? And then you mentioned kind of a squat day, bench day, deadlift day, and you referenced training the other lifts raw. Were you doing kind of what a lot of people you see doing now, or squat, bench, and dead on the same day every week? Or is it like you're dedicated, your squat day was specifically for squat?
Yeah, so in terms of my style of training, I found what worked for me is a high frequency approach. So yeah, I feel like kind of before, not to sound like a complete hipster, but kind of before it was cool to do the full squat, bench, deadlift days. That's kind of some stuff that I was doing where, like I said, the day one would be squat focused, but then I would like do some close grip bench, and then like opposite of my competition deadlift, which would be a conventional deadlift for me because I competed sumo. And so every day I trained, I benched. So again, there with the high frequency, and I never really did many variations just in terms, if you're, referring to bands or chains, I never really messed with that much. I did use boards on the bench for both building my equipped and raw bench, because I found that building the lockout, really pushing that lockout strength is what's going to, I guess, help you become the most efficient bencher. And so I did do board work, but I found a high frequency, higher volume approach with a little bit lower on the intensity. I didn't push the intensities too much. That was something that really worked best for me.
Okay. Awesome, man. And and a quick question, have you ever tried to pull conventional in gear, and how'd that go for you?
I have. It is not fun.
Okay, good. Same feeling.
Yeah, so I have. I did use. So, and I kind of had an interesting philosophy in terms of training in the gear that I feel like was kind of unique, that I didn't hear many people talk about, but it's something that I found that worked really well. But I had different varieties of gear in terms of, some of the older technology or materials that were, much more stretchy. And I did find I could use like an Inzer hardcore suit or something that had some stretch to it, a Z suit, and be able to conventional deadlift in that, because I did, in preparation for, I believe it was the 2014 Junior Worlds, I had a hamstring injury where I couldn't really pull sumo. And so I trained conventional all the way up to the meet and then pulled sumo in the meet. But I was able to push my conventional deadlift pretty well.
Awesome. And I love, so one thing I always am trying to do with these episodes is listen into like what you're saying. And I'm kind of like taking notes over here of what are things I can implement not only to my own training or coaching athletes. And I want people, that's what I really want them to take away. And so that's something interesting I've actually heard multiple times now, is training opposite deadlift until the meet. And it's like people, they think like, I'm going to forget how to do it. And I'm like, if you've done it long enough, you're not going to forget. Do you believe in that?
Yeah, no, I mean, especially knowing weightlifting, now that to me, deadlifting is a very simple movement.
Yeah.
And it's all about just maintaining the right positions. But I think as a sumo deadlifter, there can be some really major benefits to training conventional, just from like a muscular and a strength development standpoint. Not as much the other way around, but I still do believe that, conventional deadlifters can benefit from some sumo deadlifting. But yeah, I always kind of pushed it maybe into the last few weeks. Then it was just much more specific, kind of like a general periodization approach, where as you're further from the meet, a little less specific, and as you get closer to the meet, really push that specificity.
Okay. And we'll kind of, I guess I want to call it wrapping up this powerlifting talk a little bit, but what was, kind of tell me about international travel, did you have anything you had to really battle with international travel? What were the hardships? What were the things you really enjoyed? I've traveled once and competed for the Highland Games internationally, which I've been pretty much vacationed afterwards, and I cared more about that than the competition. But what did you kind of take away from international travel? Did you enjoy it? Did you really not like it? Would you do it again? All those kind of questions.
Oh, I absolutely loved it. Those were some of the best memories of my life. And I miss that. I miss competing at that level and being able to represent my country. That was something that was incredibly special to me. But starting from the first one, right, fresh out of high school, hadn't been out of it was that summer after I graduated and hadn't really been outside of the state much, and had definitely never been out of the country. So I had the process of getting a passport. But so if you're talking about my first Worlds was 2010 and in the Czech Republic. I had never been out of the country before, and just me and the rest of the sub-junior team and the coaches were out there, and it was incredibly special. Such a fun time, especially, being that age. And I learned something new every one. I would say I loved it. Didn't really have any challenges. I always competed very well on the international stage. I always very much surpassed the stuff that I was doing in the gym. I was definitely always a meet day lifter. I would say in terms of a challenge, one of the biggest things is I was cutting weight in the 2014 Junior World Championships, which was in Hungary.
Oh, yeah. And, we're out in Hungary because that's where I went, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Yeah. Yeah. So it was in Hungary. It was in kind of a small, little bit of an isolated town there in Hungary. And so it was called Orosháza.
Okay, so now I was like, man, there's no way this is going to end up being the same. I was in Győr, which is up towards Vienna, Austria, actually. We ended up going into Vienna the day after the competition. But Budapest is what – did you go into Budapest at all?
I didn't. Unfortunately, this is one thing about the international lifting and being the class just below the super heavyweights.
Yeah.
I always lifted the last day. And so I would never really get to enjoy myself outside of, the socializing with the lifters and being around lifting and meeting tons of great people from all over the world.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that meet, I was cutting weight. And of course, it was I was competed in the IPF, which is very stringent drug testing protocols. They follow WADA standards. It's a WADA governed sport.
Mm-hmm.
And the day before I lifted, they wanted to blood test me, and this is the first time that I had been blood tested. And I'm not the biggest fan of needles, and I had never even had blood drawn before. And like I said, I was cutting weight. So they take me to this, it's kind of like in a middle school gym, and, they're speaking Hungarian, and I'm just in the back there, and I'm just like, well, I hope this is legit. And, they start drawing my blood, and I get kind of woozy, and couldn't really eat up or anything to kind of, I guess, account for that because I was cutting weight. And so that was something that, was a bit of a challenge mentally, especially the day before I lifted. But, lifted fine the next day and was able to win the world championship, set a couple of world records, and all ended well.
Awesome, man. That's good to hear. And if you ever have a chance to go back, Hungary, Budapest is a really cool city. It's actually a really big party city, which I'm not a big partier, but it was just a unique lifestyle and the way it was around there. We got to kind of go around a little bit, but I too was cutting weight, so I didn't get to eat as much as I wanted and whatnot while I was there. And I actually cut weight in a bathhouse there, which was really cool. Also, the hottest sauna by 3 times I've ever been in my life. Funny story, the longest I could stay in before I had to go out was 13 minutes before I was like, I'm going to die.
Dang.
So it was that was a unique experience as well. But so then let's build to the question of why did you make this switch with so much success to weightlifting? And was that immediate kind of switch over? You kind of got done with powerlifting and you're kind of like, all right, I'm going to lift now. Or what was that process like in that decision making process?
Yeah. So it's 2017 and I competed at the Arnold. I think this was probably my 4th or 5th time competing at the Arnold. And I won. I did the, I guess it was the Pro-Am.
Mm-hmm.
I did it raw. And I won the 120 class and had a great meet. I think I went 9 for 9 and had some PRs. And after that, I just really kind of struggled, I guess, with the change in culture of the sport, and kind of some things that were happening in the sport. And I was kind of already thinking about taking a break, if not quitting altogether, because at that point I'd already been competing for 10 years, and, been on international teams, and had been able to accomplish a lot that I felt, I'm very proud of and happy to have done. And so I was already thinking about hanging it up. And then I'd gotten an email, as part of the USA Weightlifting Talent Identification and Development Program, and they have a bit of a partnership with USA Powerlifting, and so I got contacted to make the switch to weightlifting. And being an Olympian is, from as long as I can remember, has been a dream of mine. I've always loved the Olympics since I was a really young kid, and I watch it almost 24/7, when it's the Olympics time. And I was like, but I always thought, like, oh, it's too far gone. I started too late, as I was a powerlifter. And I was like, well, if USA Weightlifting sees some potential in me, why not? So I figured, and like I said, I was already kind of considering hanging up powerlifting at that point. So I said, why not? Let's do it. And, so they set me up with a coach, and I've been blessed to have worked with Tim Swords here in the Houston area, who of course is Sarah Robles' coach, and he's an Olympic team coach, and he's been in the sport for, I don't know, 3 decades or more. And so, yeah, the rest is history.
So what were some of the challenges that you experienced moving over from powerlifting to weightlifting? Were there any, or what have you kind of learned and adapted, what have you taken from powerlifting and used to your advantage in weightlifting?
Yeah, there was definitely plenty of challenges. It's just so different. You would think at the end of the day, right, it's picking up a barbell, but it is very different. Believe it or not. So of course there wasn't as many mobility issues as one would think. People kind of think of powerlifters as being muscle bound type individuals. But of course, the depth standards in the USA Powerlifting and the IPF are incredibly strict. So squatting well below parallel was something that I've always trained. And I always try to maintain myself as a bit more of an athletic powerlifter.
Absolutely.
So although I didn't have all of the mobility that's necessary to compete at weightlifting in a high level to begin with, it wasn't bad.
Yeah. You can tell that from like me watching your videos. I could tell that when you first kind of started getting into it, I was like, this dude doesn't move like a true on, like some of the powerlifters that you'll typically see and think of, but you definitely do move more just like an athlete does. Like if you take like a high school football player, when they start out, yeah, they can clean and it doesn't look great, but it's going to improve pretty quickly because they're still an athlete.
Right. Yeah. And so, the mobility still was a little bit of a challenge. But I would say the biggest challenge was, of course, the overhead position in the snatch, not necessarily from a mobility perspective, but maybe more so from a stability perspective and from, I guess, just like a neuromuscular perspective, because, right, as a powerlifter, the barbell was very rarely over my head. I would do some overhead press from, a bit of just like a bodybuilding perspective, or just kind of like an auxiliary lift, but, especially with that wide of a grip. So learning that was a big challenge, and just how different, you think, oh, a clean is just a jumpy deadlift. It's definitely not. It's a completely different movement. So having to unlearn a bit of things, especially the positioning, with the posture, that was the biggest thing. The positioning over the bar for the clean and the snatch, and the posture, because posture isn't, posture isn't a big deal in powerlifting when you're deadlifting.
Yeah.
And of course, posture is so vital in weightlifting and having, good bar path in the lift.
What do you feel like you had anything that transferred over from powerlifting to weightlifting that gave you an advantage of people who maybe start in just weightlifting?
Oh yeah, just the amount of strength reserve that I obviously had, just had a massive benefit, because what I was able to do to start is not focus on building strength like so many people have to do. And so I could devote all the time and resources to learning the movement and practicing the movements. And I think that's what allowed me to like just really take off and hit the ground running from the start. Because I was able to practice so much and the weights were so light. If you're talking about a relative max, the weights that I was doing on the snatch and clean and jerk were so light compared to the loads that I was used to lifting.
Yeah.
That recovery wasn't an issue.
That's a great way to put it. I've never actually, I don't know if I've ever really thought it. I have in a way thought it that way, but the way you just worded that, it really strikes me a little bit different. I really like it.
And honestly, the biggest carryover that I still see, of course, is being bench was my best lift. So I always had, I've kind of got the presser build, right? The little bit shorter limbs, longer torso, that you typically see with good weightlifters. But that's what helped me in the bench. And so I had tons of upper body strength. And to this day, I'll be hitting 3 years in weightlifting in June. I've only missed 2 jerks, and one of them being just like the Clark equivalent of a jerk where I just gave up on it. And the other was trying to make a technical change where I just kind of like over-cued something and sent the bar way behind me. Uh-huh. And those are the only 2 jerks that I've ever missed to this point.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting stat to have in the time that you weightlifted. That's a cool stat, man.
Yeah, and so having just the amount of upper body development, still basically it's like if I can clean it, I know I can jerk it. The clean is my limiting factor, and making sure that I'm able to rack it in. That's my limiting point.
Right. It's probably not a front squat strength though either. So because you talked about that strength deficit, so obviously your training is like technique. It's definitely a different approach that a lot of people don't have. If you were now, I don't know, what do you do for work? It's kind of a completely off the random cuff question. I mean, are you a coach of some sort, or do you work in like the business world?
No, I work in the business world. I work for one of the major oil and gas companies here in Houston.
Everybody in Texas does.
Yeah. So I work in the oil and gas industry. I started in the pipeline control center.
Yeah.
Which is shift work, and that was very, very difficult for training. Yeah. Because we would work 12-hour shifts, 3:30 to 3:30, and alternate between night shifts and day shifts. Yeah. So very tough on training. But now I'm a natural gas scheduler in the supply and trading sphere, and schedule natural gas pipelines in the Chicago and Detroit metro areas.
Okay. Well, if you were... So that kind of leads me to the question here as I was trying to figure this out. If you were a coach and someone came to you and I'm going to give you 3 different scenarios. Somebody says, I don't know if I want to do weightlifting or powerlifting. How should I pick one? Or if they are a powerlifter coming to a weightlifter, what would you say they need to work on? Or what would you do different for that? Or if they're a weightlifter thinking about powerlifting. So they're kind of 3 different scenarios. You talk me through each one of those. How would you maybe give some recommendations to somebody who's in each of those shoes from your experiences?
Okay. Yeah. So if there's somebody that's trying to decide between the 2 sports, I would tell you to think about this. What are your goals? How much time are you willing to invest? And I guess, if there's any other like physique goals or anything like that. And the reason I would say that is because some people are perfectly fine with just competing and improving their best numbers and their best self, versus others are like more driven by competing on a high level and making national and international teams and the like. And I would definitely say that, weightlifting is a much higher time and commitment. And so if you're just wanting to be a little bit more of a casual lifter or a competitor, then I think powerlifting allows that. And of course you can approach weightlifting with the casual mindset as well. But I think if you're wanting to compete at a high level, the amount of commitment that it takes to compete at weightlifting at a high level is much higher than powerlifting.
Okay.
And then from the powerlifter converting to weightlifting, I would say, just like how I approached it and how Coach Tim Swords had me do it, is it's distinguishing the mindset between training and practice. It's practicing much like maybe a golfer would practice his golf swing, a tennis player is practicing the tennis swing, or like you would maybe have like a musician, the way they practice and go over the movements. That's how I would approach it, because at the beginning, you might not feel like you get an incredible workout just because they will probably have a strength reserve as well. Okay. And you might feel like, man, these things are just so easy and they're light, but it's changing the mindset from physical training to practice. And then also just really focusing on posture. And then tips from a weightlifter to a powerlifter. The main thing that I would say is, so typically, like if you, at least it would very much depend on the level of weightlifter that they were, but typically weightlifters don't have much upper body strength and development, and so I would say bench, and the frequency, and then because they're probably going to have pretty good squats already, and they're probably going to have pretty decent pulls. And so I guess the main thing I would say is just really focus on the upper body development. And that's just kind of attack it with that same mindset that you did with weightlifting in terms of the high frequency, high volume approach.
Okay, awesome, man. That was perfect. Actually, perfect for what I was trying to see what you'd come up with, and I couldn't expect anything different from those. That's a three-headed question there. Tell me a little bit more about, like, what are your best weightlifting numbers, and kind of how has your weightlifting training evolved? Obviously, as you've grown to now be more mobile and more experienced with the lifts, is it still the technique side of things, or are you guys, have you switched things up, switched gears in the past 6 months to a year, et cetera?
Yeah. So yeah, the main thing that how my training has really changed. Okay. So wait, sorry. Let me backtrack. So my best clean and jerk has been 183, which I believe is 403 pounds.
Right over 4. Yep.
Yep. And then that was just a training lift. My best in competition is 178, I believe, and I'm not sure of the pounds on that. And then snatch, my best training snatch has been a 150, so I think that's 333. And then in competition is 147, which is just a little bit below 333. And but in terms of how my training has evolved, of course, right at the beginning, the strength reserve was such a big thing, like I touched on earlier, where I could just practice. And initially, it wasn't so much a focus on training volume as much as it was just learning the technique, being comfortable with the movement. So honestly, we worked to a max a lot of time for a long time.
Yeah.
Where we'd come in for the day, work up to a max snatch, work up to a max clean and jerk, and I progressed pretty well like that for a while. I competed in my first meet just 8 weeks after training.
Oh wow!
And I think I hit a 107 snatch and a 156 clean and jerk.
That's ridiculous. You're ridiculous. This is getting out of hand. Now, what was your frequency of maxing every day at the point?
It was usually 3 to 4 days a week.
Yeah. Okay.
Just within the first couple of months, and then Tim Swords made a program kind of around my shift work schedule.
Yeah.
And it was a very high. Yeah, it was a very interesting program. The frequency was high. And had a good combination of squatting and pulling and powers and the like, and also going heavy still. And so I was able to I snatched 300 for the first time. I think after 4.5 months of training.
Wow.
And then just kind of went from there. Yeah. And so, but in terms of how things have changed, one of the biggest challenges was when the new weight classes came out last year. Being such an undersized super heavyweight, I figured I would go ahead and try to make the cut down to the 109 class.
Okay.
Because I'm competing in this sport with aspirations of making international teams. And so that's the mindset that I have, and I've got a long way to go. And It's definitely stacked classes that I'm in, but that's my mindset, and that's what I train for every day. So I went ahead and made the cut down to 109 from 128, which is about 40 pounds.
Yeah, that's a big
And
cut.
yeah, so I made that over the course of about a year and a half, and that strength reserve that I had completely gone.
Oh man.
And I had the hardest time, especially like this past summer, mentally, just basically being so new to the sport and plateauing so quickly.
Right.
And so many people would be like, "Oh yeah, but you've cut so much weight. At that point you cut 20 or 30 pounds already." And I'm like, "Yeah, but the competitor me, the number's not going up, regardless of the excuse or the circumstances.
Yep.
It's about the weight, the number on the bar." And so that's been a really tough process. It's been this weight cut and the changes in my body, the changes in my response to training. And so here recently, of course, my programming was very, very specific. Lots of clean and jerking, snatching, with high intensity squats.
Okay.
And so my strength, I wasn't getting really strength training in. It was, just practicing the lift. So my strength just continued to drop for the entire time that I've been weightlifting.
Yeah.
And although I've improved, made leaps and bounds, improvements in the technical, and in the lifts, my strength just continued to drop. And I think I'm getting to the point now where I'm going to have to start, and I've gotten to this point where I have been focusing on strength again. Mm-hmm. And I've been really seeing that making a huge impact, and finally starting to see improvements again, because I had probably had, about 20 kilos drop on the lifts. Maybe not quite 20, maybe 10 on the snatch and 10 on the clean and jerk. But I had lost like 50 kilos on the back and front squat.
Oh, gosh. I understand that difficulty. Now, so you didn't really run into any, I mean, the weight cut's something different. Have you really run into any major injuries along your career?
So far, I haven't had any major injuries, nothing that's required surgery.
Awesome.
In powerlifting or weightlifting. Of course, tons of strains, like when I was powerlifting, pec strains all the time. Now as a weightlifter, I've been pretty dang healthy. I've had a few wrist sprains, and that's kind of something I'm dealing with now. My wrist has been bugging me on my left wrist. And then there was a period there, of course, when I was cutting this weight, and recovery was pretty hard. I was in a deficit for a year and a half.
Yeah.
And I was having a little bit of trouble keeping my back healthy. And so I had a couple of strains, like in January, I had competed at a meet and kind of strained something at my second clean and jerk. And then again, a few months later. But since then, I've been pretty healthy, like I said, aside from this wrist. And it's not a huge deal. It doesn't feel great, but I was able to snatch, 95% yesterday, and it felt fine.
Oh, okay. So it's really it's not that bad.
Yeah. It's nothing that's debilitating.
There you go. So you mentioned competing in January, stuff like that. How frequent did you compete in powerlifting on a yearly basis versus what are you competing now in weightlifting on a yearly basis?
Yeah, so in powerlifting, I had a pretty consistent schedule, which was collegiate nationals in April, which, I powerlifted at the University of Texas. And so it was basically compete at collegiate nationals. That would always qualify me for the world team. I would compete at worlds in September. And then I would usually compete not again until March at the Arnold. So it's kind of like a March, April, and then September, and then that would be it. And then as I've transitioned to weightlifting, I was competing a little more often at first, maybe every 3 months or so.
Okay.
And here lately, I've decided to just kind of like take a bit of an off season to where I can really just focus on building my strength back up.
Yeah.
And then also kind of a mental break, because I'm so passionate about this, and I invest so much in my life and so much energy into this. And like I said, with the struggles that I faced with this weight cut, I needed like a bit of a break mentally. And that break comes of the way of, if I've got a meet coming up, there's so much more emphasis on the performance of day-to-day training.
Yeah.
And so it's been kind of nice not to have a meet in the near future to where I can just train, and my training has been so much better. Mentally it's been so much better, and so it's been kind of nice having an extended break from competing. My last meet was in September, and at the AO3.
Okay.
And my next meet will probably be at the AO2 at the end of June.
Oh, awesome, man. I'll have to make sure. I think I'm going to have to I don't know what the schedule is for that, but I mean, it's in Winston-Salem. It's probably like an hour and a half from my gym.
Oh, nice.
So I'm probably either going to be, I don't know if I'm going to lift yet, but I'll probably be, I either might sign up and lift just for shits and giggles. I might, because I haven't been training weightlifting specific. I've been more specific to my Highland Games training, and I just jump in weightlifting meets for fun from time to time. But I either might compete since it'd be close. I'll probably end up volunteering, coaching, all the above. Definitely actually have to get up and meet in person, man. I don't know. I don't know what their schedule is going to be yet. I heard a rumor that they're going to possibly do all the adults throughout the week, doing that and have the junior nationals on the tail end. Which I honestly, different tangent. I think they need to split the two events. I get why they do the both, but. But yeah, man, that's awesome to have the break. I completely understand and sympathize with that. And that kind of actually answers kind of my next question I had for you was what does this year look like for you? So aside from AO2, anything else kind of on the back burner on the plans there? Would that be, I guess, setting you up for maybe AO finals at the end of the year?
Yeah. That's kind of the plan. I'm thinking I might do a local meet. That's just basically a heavy training session. If somebody's hosting one here in the Houston area sometime between now and June, maybe two of them. But in terms of on the regional or the national stage, I think the game plan is going to be the AO2 in June, and then maybe the AO finals in December.
Awesome, man. Then let's look maybe a little bit bigger picture. What about maybe your next? Obviously, we have to say quad since you're weightlifting now. What's your next quad looking like? You keep mentioning Olympics. Is that pretty much the focus, the goal? You got anything else in mind? What's going on?
Yeah. I mean, that's the goal. I like you had said about coming from such a high level in sport. Why would I leave that? And honestly, that has been a huge piece of humble pie. To be kind of the top in the sport, being able, making international teams every year, and setting records and stuff, to being pretty, maybe a little above average, but definitely not near the caliber that I hope to be. So yeah, to answer your question, that's the goal. That's the goal. That's the whole reason I switched. I understand it as a lofty goal. And I'm very real about the possibility or lack thereof. But nonetheless, that's what my eyes are set on. And that's the competitor in me and where I was in the sport of powerlifting. That's most definitely the goal. And I think looking into the next quad, I'm going to continue to push until kind of I find out if it's not in the cards for me. And pretty much as soon as I find that out, and then I'll probably hang it up.
I hear you. Awesome, man. Well, I absolutely respect that. And actually, I'm going to kind of get towards wrapping it up. And I normally ask a question, but you've done pretty good about answering the question I typically always ask people, and that is, what would you do different back then with what you know now? We kind of touched on that already. So I want to ask a little bit different question that's kind of for fun.
Okay.
That is, describe the emotion of, and I'm hoping they did it, when you won some of these world championships. How freaking cool is it if they play in the national anthem and you won?
Oh yeah, man! I'll never forget any of those moments. Some of the most special and emotional moments in my life, especially that very first one.
Sure.
Just being, still being a little bit naive to that world of international strength sports, but showing up at the first World Championships, right, and we're all decked out in there's our respective countries' gear, and to show up and be able to win on my first World Championship, and hold the nation's flag over my head, and they play the national anthem. That's a feeling that for sure never got old.
Yeah.
I won 4 world championships, so I got to experience that 4 times. And it's something that I'll probably never stop chasing.
For sure.
And that's definitely something that I'm chasing again, just a little bit of a different route. I always said, unfortunately, I got good at the wrong sport when I was powerlifting because being an Olympian, like I said earlier, was always such a dream of mine. So that first time, I felt like an Olympian, and it was something that was super special.
Hell yeah, that's awesome, man. Definitely, in the back burner, in the back of my head, something I want to try to somehow do, some way, in something. I haven't figured that out yet. That's for damn sure. But, man, this has been awesome. I literally tell people, it's selfish. I get to do this selfishly for me to have these awesome conversations, and people are lucky to get to listen in. Is kind of the way I put it. Because I sit here and I don't have a camera up, but I'm sitting here smiling at my computer screen the whole time because I thoroughly enjoy this. I want to thank you for that. So let's move into the lightning round, and we'll wrap it up. Let you put some plugs in, and I always have to throw these in. The first podcast I was part of, we did these, and a couple others I listened to do these, and I love them because they're so different than what we've talked about. So the first one is favorite food or restaurant.
That's honestly, that's pretty easy. It's got to be pizza. I feel like I could eat pizza almost every day of my life.
All right. Well, hey, you're in Houston, not terribly far. If you ever happen to end up in Memphis, Tennessee, my brother / family, we own and run pizza restaurants in Memphis, Tennessee. It's called Excellence Best Pizza in Town. You'll never forget it now.
Very nice.
But if you're ever in Memphis, hit me up. We'll try to hook you up with a pizza somehow. It's different. It's a different style, so you have to kind of experience it for itself, man.
Yeah, that would be awesome. And I also have the world's worst sweet tooth. I love anything baked, anything sweet. Oh, that's my thing. So I definitely didn't get to be this thick by chance.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the biggest guy in the world. I'm definitely a bigger guy. I love food. I'm such a food guy. Doesn't matter what it is. I pretty much like it. So I love asking that question. Now I'm also side tangent, and I don't know. I'm plugging somebody else's stuff, but I don't care. Do you know of Dan McKim at all?
I do not.
Do not. Okay, so Dan was a world champion Highland Games thrower, phenomenal strength athlete, just freakishly large dude. But he wrote a book. I know you'll probably appreciate it. It's called Heavy Confessions. It's a small little book. It's all about guys of girth.
Nice.
So being somebody over 225 pounds, you'll probably relate. And it's comedy, and it's great. It's a great book that kind of relates to just stories of large dudes.
Know your girth, know your worth.
There you go. There's my quote for this episode right there.
Yeah.
So I'm a huge craft beer fan. If I had to ask you, what's your favorite beer?
I am also a huge craft beer man. I love it. I'm on Untapped all the time. You can follow me on Untapped at Preston Turner, just like the Insta handle.
Okay.
But yeah, man, my favorites, kind of on both ends of the spectrum. I love just full flavored brews. I love the IPAs, particularly the hazy IPAs. And then I love stouts and porters. If I had to pick a favorite, there's a brewery here in Houston called Spindle Tap, and they have a Houston Haze. It's a hazy IPA. It's amazing. Or there's a brewery here called Eighth Wonder, and they have a Vietnamese coffee porter called Rocket Fuel, and I just love it. It's amazing, especially on nitro.
Awesome, man. I literally just added you on Untapped.
Nice.
But it's awesome to get. I love collecting ideas, talking craft beer with people. And it's cool that your go-tos are in Houston. Mine are a little bit all over, but I definitely have my favorites here in Charlotte. And we'll have to dig some up. Maybe if AO2 works out somehow, some way, we'll go grab a beer or something like that.
Heck yeah, that'd be awesome.
All right, so this is a little different. What's your favorite lift to perform?
Favorite lift to perform? It's got to be the snatch.
Yeah.
There's just something that you just feel, especially when your posture and the timing and everything is just right. The way it just flies over your head, and if you're just feeling quick and snappy that day, there's just something about the sound of a snatch and just hitting it just right that's incredibly gratifying. And I feel really athletic and explosive doing snatches. So that's got to be my favorite.
Awesome. I was expecting a bench there. I was thinking bench was going to come back.
I was really good at the bench, but I can't say I necessarily, loved it. I definitely think in terms of powerlifting, I definitely enjoyed squat the most.
Okay. And you kind of hinted at it. I'm wondering if you're going to say the same thing. But if I have to ask you your favorite place you have traveled for a competition, where would that be? And you kind of mentioned your first competition at that first World Championship was your favorite competition, I guess you've done, if I would say that correctly. What's been your favorite place you've traveled to?
Yeah, so I would say favorite place I've traveled to for a competition was the Pan Am Championships for powerlifting, and it was at the St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands. It was just like right on the beach in this awesome resort, and it was amazing. I can't necessarily say that was my favorite meet, but in terms of favorite place, it was fun because I basically hopped off the podium, took my medal down to the beach, and jumped in the water, and it was amazing.
That's awesome, man. Well, so that'll pretty much wrap it up. Where can people find you if they're trying to find you on social media? If you want them to look up some specific information, anything like that, you plug away. It's kind of your time to shine on that, man.
Yeah, basically I'm the most active on Instagram. I think that's per the course of most strength athletes these days, but I basically use it as my training log. So I usually do just kind of some highlights from most sessions, but you can find that at Preston, as in like the lift, Preston Turner.
Pressin Turner.
Yep, okay. That's exactly right. I do have a YouTube channel, but don't do too much with it. And I think that's like at pturner264.
Okay.
But other than and then of course, if you're on Untapped, if you're a fellow craft brew lover, I'd love to connect there on Untapped, and it's the same at Preston Turner.
Awesome. Man.
In terms of other plugs, I've got a really cool sponsor, Load Strength Sports, and they're a smaller, newer company that really has some really nice gear in terms of they've got a variety of different belts and sleeves and wraps for different sports. So, I always appreciate if you want to support me, then you can go and head over there and pick up a belt. I really like their belt.
Awesome. I appreciate it, man. Well, Preston, I really appreciate your time, man, especially here in an evening time after work, all that jazz. This was great. I really thoroughly enjoyed this. I really, really, really do appreciate the time. When I do put this episode out, put out these seasons, I'll let you know. I'll share it with you and tag you in all this stuff. And we may have to have you on again, maybe talk a little bit more weightlifting, maybe get one in person, something like that down the road, man. Yeah,
I would love that, man. Thank you so much for reaching out. That means a whole lot that, somebody kind of takes notice of the effort that I put in. And really, as a podcast nerd, a big podcast buff, I really enjoy any chance I can to kind of talk training and talk nutrition and all the like. So I really appreciate you having me on and us getting to have this conversation. It was a really good time.
Thanks, brother. And I'll keep following you along and catch up with you soon.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Later.